Welcome to Codecraft by Adiremi. We will continue from where we stopped last week. This time around, we are going to create our JavaScript. So first, what we are going to do now is let's correct the mistake we did the last time in our CSS. Okay, sorry, in our HTML, you can see the mistake we did there. Okay, now it has been corrected. Now let's view it with our live server. So in our JavaScript, we will start with selecting all the HTML elements that we need using the document.getElement by ID. That's what I'm going to do first. Okay, it's working perfectly fine. So let's continue with our JavaScript. So let's select all the HTML elements. Then we'll save them in a variable. I'm using const. Okay. Get element by ID. So let's copy. I think we have 6 elements. We have 6 elements in our JavaScript. If you look at it, so we're going to create 6 variables. We'll select all the elements, then we'll save them in a variable. Okay. Okay. And the last one. Okay, let's start from the first one. Let's call the variable expense form. Expense form. So if you look at our ID, we have expense form. That's the first element we are targeting. Expense form. Now the next one is title input. Let's use start title input as the variable name. If you look at our input, look at the ID, you see title there. So we're making use of title. Okay, let's call this one amount input. Amount input. If you look at the second input type, you see the ID there, amount. Amount. Then this one, let's name it category input. Category input. If you look at the select element there, you will see the ID category. Category. So the next one is expense list. So if you go to the unordered list, if you check the ID there, you see expense list. And lastly, let's name this total display. If you look at our span ID, you see the word total there. Okay. Now this allows the JavaScript to read users' input, display expenses, and update the total amount. Now let's create a variable called expense. So it's going to be empty. It's going to be empty array. Now let's render the expenses. So we'll create a function called render expenses. So this function will display all expenses and update the total. Expense expense list dot inner HTML. Then the total, let's put a variable. So to start from 0. So this will prevent duplicate items from showing. Now I'm trying to look through each expenses using for each. Expenses comma index. So this index helps us identify which expenses to delete later. Total loss equals expense dot amount. So this will keep adding each expense amount. Anytime you click on the render expenses, it will keep adding the expense amount. Now let's create a list item. So we are creating a list item. We're now saving it in a variable called li. Remember, we did not create it in our JavaScript, in our HTML. I mean, we are using the JavaScript to create it, using the create element function. No, the li dot inner HTML. The backtick, dollar sign to be expense, open brackets, expense dot title slash dollar sign expense dot category amount, sorry. The reason why we have $2 sign there is because we want it to have a dollar sign. That is expense dot category. So one of the dollar sign is going to display in our now. Let's create a button. So that will be the delete button. Since we've already styled it in our CSS, which is the delete btn. So let's create an on-click. Which is delete expense. We are going to create the delete expense function later. Delete expense, open bracket, dollar sign, curly bracket, index. Don't close it. So each expense is displayed with a delete button. So once you are adding each list, once you are adding the expenses, once you are adding the expense, it will be displaying with a delete button so that you can easily delete it. So want it to be adding to the list. So we are using expense list dot append child. Open brackets li. So it will be adding to the list. Now after displaying everything, we update the total and save the data. We update the total and save the data into our local storage. Now we test content equals total. So let's save the data in our local storage using local storage dot set item. Set item What are we saving? We are saving expenses. JSON dot 25. So this keeps the data even after refreshing the page. Now let's go back to the variable expenses. We are going to get the data out of the storage now using dot pass, open brackets, local storage dot get item. Get item, open bracket, expenses. So we are getting the expenses now out of the local storage. So we are using the or. No. So what this is trying to tell us is if expenses exist, we use them. If not, we start with an empty array. If expenses exist, we use them. But if it's empty, if it does not exist, we start with an empty array. So let's add new expenses. So I'm making use of event listener. Expense form dot add event listener. We're making use of submit. So once it's submitting, it will be adding each expenses. It prevents default function. So this is a JavaScript function which prevents the page from refreshing anytime we click on the submit. Now let's create an expense object. This new expense. Now the first one is title. It's title input dot value. Dot value. The next one is amount. Let's use number function. In bracket amount input dot value. And then the last one is category. All what we are doing here is we are collecting the user's input and we are storing it in an object called new expense. Everything the user is typing in the form is going to save everything here. So expense dot push. So once it's saving, it will update that. So we are calling the function render expenses now. Once it's saved, it will be update. So the new expense is saved and displayed instantly. So once it has saved and displayed, we want the input field to be empty. The title input dot value empty, just an empty string. We'll do the same for the amount too. Empty string. So let's create the function delete expense. Delete expense. Create the function delete expense. Open bracket, index. Saving an index there. Open bracket. Expenses dot please. Open bracket. So let's call the function again. So this please function, it will remove the selected expense and update the list again. That's the work of the split function. It will remove the selected expense. And finally now, we render expenses when the page load. So let's go down. Okay, we've corrected our mistake because we did not close the function before. The render expenses, function, we did not close it. Yeah. No. Now let's check the console. Okay, there's no error in the console. Let's check it if it's working. Okay. Render expense is not defined. Okay. Render expense is not defined. Let's try it again. Okay, it's working perfectly fine now. You can see. So the code allows users to add expenses, delete them, calculate total, and store everything in a local storage using JavaScript. You can see to add. Look at the delete button there to calculate the total instantly. So we've come to the end of this tutorial. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share if you find this video helpful. See you next week. Thank you.